Book favourites, your light in book darkness. This time we're going to talk about a historical novel, namely Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, winner of the 2009 Man Booker Prize, which is a very famous literary award, supposed the most important literary award in England. Now, this book is a lovely book. It's one of my favourite historical novels, and that's why I'm recommending it today. I do want to say that this is specifically suitable for students whose English is really good. So, say year five, year six, probably. It's not easy English, but it is worth it if you get into it. Now, what is it actually about? This book's hero is Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Cromwell was the chief minister to the King Henry VIII of England. And it sets in the first half of the 16th century. So it's based on true events, which makes the story very interesting because if you do a bit of research, you know exactly how it's going to end. And, Hilary Mantel has actually done a lot of research. So this book really makes it a really lovely and rich experience to read if you're into history, specifically English history. Now, the two gentlemen that you can see right here, so you've got Thomas Cromwell right here, looking off into the distance, and you've got Henry VIII right there next to him, are the two main characters of this book. Now, let me talk a bit about Henry VIII because you do need a bit of background knowledge to understand this book. Now, Henry VIII is notorious for marrying six times, and he married his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish lady, wanted to divorce her, but wasn't allowed to because the church wouldn't allow it, the Catholic Church, the Pope wouldn't allow it. And it's basically led to Henry separating his Church of England from Rome and made himself head of the church, which was, of course, a huge thing back at that time. The of his wives was second of his wives was Anne Boleyn, and the third was Jane Seymour. Now, Anne Boleyn he had beheaded, and the third one tragically died. Now, Wolf Hall focuses on his marriage to the first queen, so Catherine, and his decision to divorce her because he fell in love with Anne Boleyn. And then the second book of the trilogy, Bring Up the Bodies, focuses more on Anne Boleyn. And then the third book, The Mirror and the Light, focuses on his marriage to Jane. Now, the other three marriages, you don't really get into that because we follow Thomas Cromwell's story. And this is basically all that Thomas had to say about these first three marriages. Now, very interesting. Now, perhaps you know of Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen of England. She was Anne Boleyn's daughter. She also features in the novel as well. Now, you can imagine this was quite an important time in England. So you've got your 16th century political intrigue going on. You've got all these horrible clashes with the Pope. You've got tension between the Protestants and the Catholics. You've got all these different families still recuperating from the Wars of the Roses, from these ancient grudges. People who felt they had a claim to the throne of England. So it was a very bloody time as well. Now, why should you read it? Well, first of all, you should definitely read this if you are a history buff and you're really interested in 16th century London specifically. If you're interested in politics and in the court, how that worked at that time, you should read it if you're into really gory things like torture and death, but also betrayal as well. The interesting thing for me is that it's actually based on true events, as I said before. So you really feel as if you get to know the characters and you feel like you're learning about history. Of course, it is almost all of it romanticized, idealized. Because of course the main character, you see everything through his eyes, and we actually have no idea what this man was like. Thomas Cromwell, very black and white depictions by historians and by his contemporaries. Some said that he was the best statesman ever. Some would say that he was a horrible spy, someone who really manipulated the king. In this book, he is portrayed as a hero. In the trilogy, he is portrayed as a hero. So it does perhaps skew your vision on history a bit, but I do find that very interesting and see how Mantle wrote about these true historical events. And finally, what's very interesting about this book, but what makes it also a bit confusing perhaps, is that the author uses the stream of consciousness technique throughout the book. So you really follow the thoughts of the narrator, Thomas Cromwell. Um, you follow all his dreams, all his thoughts, all his visions on everything that's happening, and he sort of jumps from one thought to another, which in one way makes it very interesting because you really get to know the character, of course, but on the other hand, might make it a bit more confusing. But I find that very interesting because it makes you think as a reader. So, if you're into historical novels, if you're interested in 16th century London politics, especially King Henry VIII, who is a fascinating character, historical character, then you should definitely read this book for your book report and then talk about it. So, this was your book favorites, and see you in my next video.